evening. This is the Human Rights Commission. Welcome, everybody. We're having a forum this evening on asset forfeiture and the 4th and 14th Amendment. Commissioner McCullough, will you start the meeting with the flag salute?
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
And Commissioner Zelnis, would you read a mission statement, please?
The mission of the Human Rights Commission of Palm Springs is to promote improved human relations, civic peace, intergroup understanding, and the full acceptance, respect, and participation of all persons in all aspects of community life so that we will be equal in the eyes of each other.
Thank you. Lee, will you do the roll call, please?
Commissioners Janis, absent. Commissioner Boyd? Present. Commissioner Yo? Present. Commissioner Bowens?
Present.
Commissioner Feingold?
Here.
Commissioner Zelnis?
Here.
Commissioner Aguano?
Present.
Commissioner McCullough?
Present.
Okay, now we can adjourn the meeting to start the forum, correct? Has the agenda been posted?
Yes, it was posted according to the Brown Act on Friday, January 3rd.
Okay, thank you, Lee. And now we're going to adjourn the meeting and go to the forum. Before I turn it over to Commissioner Aguano, I want to greet everybody. Thank you for coming. I know you're all busy people. We appreciate it. Thank you, people in the audience, the media. And I'm just asking, these are guests, your guests, no applauding, no booing. I know this is a passionate issue for some people, but let's have a nice, civilized, educational forum. And with that, I'll turn it over to Commissioner Aguano.
Thank you, Commissioner Feingold, and welcome, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you for joining us this evening for a very special edition of the Human Rights Commission's Forums on the Bill of Rights. Tonight's topic is a discussion of civil asset forfeiture. This legal concept basically holds that property used in illegal activity can be confiscated by law enforcement agencies, and the proceeds derived from its sale used by law enforcement to combat crime. Tonight's forum will have a twofold approach. We will look at civil asset forfeiture in general terms as it is interpreted through the Bill of Rights and other constitutional amendments, and we will discuss these broad concepts as it relates directly to the city of Palm Springs. A little background information is appropriate at this time. For several years past, the city of Palm Springs has signed a memorandum of understanding allowing the Palm Springs Police Department to join the Inland Crackdown Allied Task Force, known by its acronym INCA. INCA is a multi-agency narcotics task force consisting of federal, state, and local enforcement agencies whose purpose is to target major Colombian and Mexican drug cartels, with specific emphasis on Riverside County. Specifically, INCA members include the California Department of Justice Division of Law Enforcement, the Bureau of Narcotics Enforcement, the California Bureau of Beverage Control, the United States Immigration and Naturalization Service, the Riverside Sheriff's Department, and the police departments of Beaumont, Chino, Corona, Hemet, Riverside, and formerly Palm Springs. The proposed renewal of the Memorandum of Understanding was placed on and then pulled from the September 4th, 2002 City Council consent calendar and referred to the City Attorney's Office and to the Chief's Police Advisory Board. The Chiefs Advisory Board met on October 15th and referred the matter to the Human Rights Commission, which resulted in the scheduling of this forum. As this topic pertains directly to and strongly impacts upon our city's ability to combat crime, our focus will look beyond the broad constitutional issues and include discussions on the safeguards against abuse within our own community. Just a brief summary of the amendments that probably pertain to civil asset forfeiture. The Fourth Amendment to the Constitution states in part, the right of the people to be secure in their persons, houses, papers, and effects against unreasonable searches and seizures shall not be violated, but upon probable cause. The Fifth Amendment states that no person shall be deprived of life, liberty, or property without due process of law, nor shall private property be taken for public use without just compensation. The Sixth Amendment provides for criminal prosecutions, speedy and public trials, impartial juries, the ability to confront accusers and obtain witnesses in favor of the accused, and the assistance of the counsel for the defense of the accused. The Eighth Amendment prohibits excessive fines. The 14th Amendment reaffirms that no state shall deprive any person of life, liberty, or property without due process of law, nor deny to any person the equal protections of the law. It is against this constitutional backdrop that we hear the challenges to civil asset forfeiture. This evening, we have assembled a distinguished panel of experts to discuss these issues. George Franzen is the president of the Desert Pass chapter of the American Civil Liberties Union. He is a graduate of the Brigham Young University School of Law and a former member of the National Board of Directors of the ACLU. Susan Marie Weber represents the Desert Area Libertarian Party. Jessica Scarf, a familiar face on these forum panels, is a graduate of UC Berkeley and has a master's from the University of York, England, in political philosophy. She is an adjunct faculty member at College of the Desert in the Poli-Sci Department, teaching courses on the theory and reality of American government. Judge James Gray is a 19-year veteran trial judge of the Superior Court of Orange County, a former federal prosecutor in the U.S. Attorney's Office in Los Angeles, and a criminal defense attorney in the Navy JAG Corps. In 1998, he ran for Congress as a Republican against Bob Dornan. Judge Gray is an advocate for changing our national drug policy, and he has participated in over 100 radio and TV shows and drug forums nationwide. He is the author of Why Our Drug Laws Have Failed and What We Can Do About It, a judicial indictment of the war on drugs. Judge Gray wishes it to be clearly understood that that it is our national drug policy that has failed and not law enforcement. He believes that law enforcement, along with others, has been harmed by the war on drugs, including, as I'm sure he will explain, by asset forfeiture laws. Anthony Taylor is an attorney at law. Mr. Taylor graduated with a Bachelor of Science from the University of Southern California, summa cum laude, class valedictorian of the School of Public Administration in 1997. Continuing at USC, Mr. Taylor received his JD in 2000. At USC Law School, Mr. Taylor was a quarterfinalist in the Hale Moot Court Honors Program and served as a teaching assistant to Dean Jeffrey Cohen of the Annenberg School for Communications. Anthony grew up in law enforcement as the son of a retired LAPD commander and the former co-founder of DARE, Robert Taylor. Anthony worked for the USC Department of Public Safety as a student officer as an undergraduate at USC. Now, Anthony represents municipal police departments in both litigation and from an advisory standpoint. Gary Gingerin, who needs no introduction, is our city's chief of police. And we had originally scheduled Sergeant Greg Jackson, who's unavailable tonight, and Sergeant Dan Rose, who just walked in. And you probably would explain why he came a little late. It's very interesting. Sergeant Rose is a Palm Springs Police Department detective and the supervisor responsible for the Palm Springs Narcotics Task Force for Asset Forfeiture. We will begin this evening with general questions. Any panel member may address the topic as it's brought up. At approximately 7:15, each panelist will be given 2 minutes for a concluding statement, followed by comments and questions from our commissioners. Finally, we will give the audience an opportunity to comment and ask questions. If I would be allowed to please frame the first question. The Drug Policy Alliance website states that when civil asset forfeiture proceedings are a civil action against a person's property, constitutional protections, such as I have mentioned previously, do not apply. The burden of proof falls on the property owner to prove that the property is innocent, and not on the law enforcement agency to prove that the property is actually drug-related. This might come as a surprise to most citizens. It certainly did to me. It appears to turn the notion of innocent until proven guilty and due process on its head. The question is, historically and politically, how did we arrive at the legalization of civil asset forfeitures? Anybody wants to jump in? Please do so.
Joe gave me a heads up on this one, so I'll give it a shot. Actually, being relatively unhappy with the way the British enforce the Navigation Acts, as you might imagine, colonial leaders moved away from forfeiture, seeing the potential for abuse and the pretty serious consequences of the way it was used under British rule. And that's clear in the proceedings of the Constitutional Convention as well as the First Congress. And this is true for forfeiture in criminal conditions or criminal cases. But civil forfeiture continued under mostly maritime law for the confiscation of contraband. And contraband, of course, is a moving target. What is contraband at one point is not often contraband later, or vice versa. So in fact, when the slave trade was ended, slave ships, slaves became contraband. And there was much debate at times over what to do with that contraband. But there was a significant movement away from the use of forfeiture as a penalty in criminal situations. But since colonial times, we have seen use of forfeiture. Civil War era, against rebel property, similar time period, the Black Codes, which allowed white Americans to confiscate the property of black Americans. Certainly during Prohibition, we saw the confiscation of alcohol and alcohol-making instruments. And then the latest wave in the 70s and 80s with RICO and the war on drugs. But I think that what we have seen in the past 20 years, particularly with RICO and the war on drugs, is a significant departure from our history on asset forfeiture since colonial times. So that's my brief contribution there.
I was edified by what Jessica just said. I wasn't aware of a lot of this, but I can tell you that my view with regard to the war on drugs is that pretty much most people realize that it's not working. People in law enforcement, people in government, people certainly on the streets, editorial writers and the rest, we all realize that drugs can be harmful, that the presence of these drugs in our communities causes harm, and they have always and they always will. So they want to try to make this square peg fit into the round hole. And what we're doing in typical traditional law enforcement hasn't worked, and so we try ever more radical measures to reduce these problems. And one of the radical measures, of course, is more eavesdropping, more wiretapping, more search warrants, the courts reducing the requirements for search warrants, the more intrusion into the civil liberties. In fact, the war on drugs has been the biggest civil liberties disaster in the history of our country, in my view. One of the things that we have tried to do, because the traditional law enforcement hasn't worked, is go to asset forfeiture, which, as you say, Commissioner Joe, has turned our whole system of jurisprudence on its ear, from my standpoint. Yes, the citizen from whom these assets are taken is required affirmatively to go forward and prove that my pen here was not purchased with money that I gained by sale of illicit drugs, as opposed to requiring the government to prove that it was. This is a substantial change and a very dangerous one. And so even that hasn't worked in a lot of ways, but it has resulted in a lot of very horrendous things. And you can see that the statistics are somewhere around 70% of all people from whom assets are seized are not even charged with a crime, much less convicted of a crime. And it isn't the drug lords. I don't know anyone who doesn't believe that if you are a drug lord and you are using an airplane to smuggle cocaine or marijuana into this country, I don't know anyone that doesn't believe that that airplane should not be forfeited. I think it should be. But the difference is that the person should be convicted of that crime first, and then after the conviction, you should submit to that same jury the evidence that this airplane was used in the crime. And then the money, in my view, should not be put to the police. Put it into the general fund, put it into any form of drug treatment, that sort of thing. And let me quickly say, and I know that the chief would care about this as well, we have to fund our police. In fact, I'll make the radical statement, Chief, that we need police in this world. We even need judges, of all things. We need prisons. So there's no question about that. And police should be funded. But the idea that we are putting these monies into the police is a trap that I'd like to talk about later. I'm getting a little bit far beyond here. But this whole thing has escalated into yet another radical means of trying to make the war on drugs work, because it doesn't. And we're getting ever more radical. This is one of the more radical ones.
Anyone else? Okay, well, this question is about the abuse of power, and reading literature on both sides, I came across eloquent defenses, pro and con, and one of the more eloquent defenses on the pro side of asset forfeiture came out of your book, Judge Gray, Why Our Drug Laws Have Failed, if I may quote. You have written, quote, "From the standpoint of law enforcement, probably no other procedure accomplishes so many objectives simultaneously as civil asset forfeiture. Removal of assets interferes with the illegal activity itself, weakens the people engaging in that activity, deters others by reducing the profit to be realized, punishes the wrongdoer, and denies him the enjoyment and use of the assets gained from his illegal behavior, satisfies the claims of possible victims of crimes, and raises money for law enforcement agencies. As one would expect, however, with so much money at stake, a great many abuses of this system have been reported," end quote. Now, in the year 2000, President Clinton signed into law the Civil Asset Forfeiture Act, which, among other things, grants people whose assets have been seized the right to legal counsel and the temporary return of seized assets to their owners while an investigation is pending if hardship can be proven. So the question is, are these safeguards sufficient against abuse? Are there any other safeguards?
Could I make a comment on that? I believe that the Civil Asset Reform Act that you're referring to applies only on the federal level. So the guarantee that you would have the right to counsel to help you prepare your petition to have your assets returned is not guaranteed on the state level. It's only in federal cases.
Okay. Anyone else?
You quoted me accurately. And I think that this is used as a major tool. The problem is also it is a major trap, and it gives rise, deeply disturbing rise, to abuses because we have an institutional problem here, and even an institutional corruption. So many of the times, these laws were aimed at drug lords, aimed at big traffickers, and almost never are they actually utilized toward those big traffickers. We will have police officers in the inner city who will, in effect, roust some low-level type person and take the money. They'll have a $100 bill in his wallet and say, "Oh, you couldn't possibly have gotten this from anything other than drug deals, and we really know you're involved with drug deals anyway, so we're going to seize it." Well, it costs the person $200 to file a claim to get the money back. And so as a result, these small amounts of money are put into this fund. No one is ever charged with anything. It's 70, 80% of the people from whom things are seized are never convicted of a crime. We have situations, literally, in which grandparents who, in the mercy of their heart, have taken their grandchildren in with them because they were having some problems. And literally their house has been seized because their 15-year-old grandson was selling marijuana out of their bedroom without them knowing it. And literally all of the parties involved, including the prosecutor and the judge, said, "You know, your only mistake here, grandfather and grandmother, was being too kind to your grandson." These are institutional abuses that simply are rampant because the money's important. Let me get to my trap for a minute, because I'd be interested in hearing. I have no information about the city of Palm Springs about this, and the chief is here. He's a good man, by the way, and I commend your entire city for your chief of police. But the trap is, and city after city has realized this, the trap is that say you seize $100,000 last year. The city council knows that. So they will look at you and this chief of police and say, Well, congratulations, you seized 100,000 last year. We know you can do at least that well this coming year, so we're going to subtract $100,000 from your funding for next year, and they start off in the hole. And they, in order then to get their new squad cars or to get their new bulletproof vests or whatever, they are having to go out and seize money. That is their prime solicitation for funding. And it's the trap. We all know that the police forces need to be funded, but making them seize a part of the booty in order to fund their own operations is a trap that is a very serious one. And so it is giving rise to lots and lots of things that you and the city council and we as citizens do not want to have. And that's something that I think that the city should be aware of. Fund the police, but do not put the seizures into anything other than general fund, because it simply puts the incentives in the wrong place.
I read the judge's book. Matter of fact, it's a very good book. It is a lot of time and a lot of effort. He was telling me, I think it took him 3 years to write the book. He has in there some examples. I'm not familiar with them. It is outside the scope of my experience as a police officer. I can tell you as a department head that that has not happened to me. I can tell you that the direction that I give Sergeant Rose is not and never has been, and I have never been a part of any staff level where we have said, we want you to target money. We have said, and I will always say, I want you to arrest drug dealers. And that is the target, and it has been the target. City Council has never said anything to me along the lines of your budget is going to be restricted because of asset seizure. I'm not saying that that hasn't happened in the past. I don't know. It's clearly outside the experience here. It is clearly something I'm not a part of, nor will I be a part of targeting people for money. I'm about enforcing the law, and I'm about arresting drug dealers. If you're a drug dealer, you will, Sergeant Rose will be directed to go after you. Pure and simple. You have nothing to fear from the police if you don't violate the law. We won't bother you. So Sergeant Rose, I'm sure, will attest to that. I have never talked to him about seizing property. We have abuses because we are human beings involved in interpreting the law. It has been my experience whenever I have violated constitutional laws, I have lost my evidence. If I have misunderstood the law, the courts have said you can't use it. It's also my experience that if you violate civil laws, the courts give very, very harsh corrections, where instead now they take money out of my budget, or in some cases they can take it away from me personally. I see asset seizure as a tool, and I see that their court does protect, and I think it keeps law enforcement, the courts keep law enforcement balanced, because we recognize that sooner or later, if there is an abuse as such that's cited, which I am sure that what the judge is saying is accurate. He's a very honorable man, and I would trust that he has got that information. What will eventually happen, and which always does in law enforcement, it catches up to you. And then it just comes pouring down that the courts say, you are taking people off the street for $100 and they got a marijuana thing, a roach in their pocket. And what eventually would happen is a severe correction. And then it ricochets across law enforcement. That's how the courts work. They come in and they slap us severely and they correct us. So I'm sure that there's mistakes made on search and seizure. There's mistakes made on use of force. And the courts have, in my experience, have been there to give us the corrections. But for Palm Springs, what is cited is not part of what I have experienced.
Yes.
I think that we're all in agreement that this has nothing to do with the chief. I think we all agree that he's an upstanding person, and we've all had wonderful dealings with him, but he's not always going to be here. And that's what this is all about. We have to plan ahead for when we don't have honorable people, and we have to recognize, as he said, we are all humans. And humans, unfortunately, when tempted by money, frequently go that way. And I'm sure all of us here in this room know people that have been tempted by money and made decisions that we would have preferred that they didn't make, or that we ourselves would have preferred not to have made. So when you ask what are the potential abuses? That is a potential abuse, human behavior. And so how do we guard against it? We don't have asset forfeiture. We just stop it. We don't do those kind of things. We don't have to do them. Just because other cities do them doesn't mean that Palm Springs has to do them. And like I said, it has nothing to do with the chief and has nothing to do with Sergeant Rose. But we don't know what's going on out there. We've, when he commented about the judge's book, we've read lots and lots and lots and lots of cases where things went wrong and where people are being stopped. Like he said, for the 100, the 200, the 300, give me your watch, give me this, give me that. This is just inappropriate. When it comes down to money, then principles go out the door. And I think that's what we're asking you to consider.
Thank you. I'd like to tie the last four comments into a follow-up question. And again, we're addressing the general philosophy of civil asset forfeiture, and we're also looking at the local application. What happens in Palm Springs? Are we perpetrating abuses? Now, my admittedly cursory review of the literature, pro and con, shows that the most egregious abuses occur in states other than California. And what George said about Clinton's Act of 2000, that it's at the federal level and not on the local level, given that California jurisprudence is often in the vanguard, dare I say, liberal reform, isn't the problem really one of national codification of asset forfeiture laws and ensuring sufficient safeguards against abuse?
Well, if I might make a comment in that area. In 1974, the U.S. Supreme Court ruled that civil asset forfeiture is legal, that it is a legal method for fighting the war on drugs in particular. And therefore, I believe that change in the area of civil asset forfeiture has got to come on the state levels and also on the local levels. That's where the change will be effected.
Okay.
Let me chime in on there too, and I can steal some of Mr. Taylor's thunder over here because we were talking before we began. I am prohibited by law from giving legal advice, so I'm not giving legal advice right now. But I have never read anything that makes me believe that anything that you're talking about with regard to your Inca outfit would be illegal. I think that the way it has been interpreted by the United States Supreme Court as well as other appellate courts as well as the statutes, I am telling you on the City Council that I do not believe that this is an illegal thing in any fashion. However, just because you can do something does not at all mean you want to, so that is where I would quarrel with with the possibility of using this.
Well, let me follow up then on the difference between could and should. And again, it's on the topic of due process. As our viewers may recall, during the previous forum on the death penalty, the Supreme Court often invokes the concept of evolving societal standards when weighing the constitutionality of a particular issue. The ACLU website states that despite the Fifth Amendment, and this is what you just quoted, the 1974 Supreme Court ruled that property could be seized and sold by the government without any arrest, conviction, or due process. Given the fact that there is a potential for abuse at the local, state, county, and federal level, my question is, what are the evolving political attitudes regarding the voting public's willingness to accept constitutional bending of the rules when they feel threatened by the evils of drugs?
I'll take a shot at that one. I do think that attitudes change, but sometimes we misinterpret popular attitudes as well. As I said earlier, there was a strong movement away from forfeiture in early American history, and there has been resistance to it at other times. I think sometimes when the public looks at a situation as us versus them, there's all of us on one side and them, the bad guys, on the other side. I think that sometimes there might be a willingness to accept things that would otherwise maybe not be acceptable. But the more that the public becomes aware of the horror stories that Judge Gray has talked about, that we've read about in other places, albeit outside of Palm Springs, outside the Coachella Valley, even outside the state of California, potentially for that matter, I think that the willingness that might initially be there will tend to, if not perhaps already wane and disappear. Some people have suggested that when it comes to seizure in any context, that maybe we ought to establish a new kind of Miranda warning. You know, when one of us, we can almost all cite the Miranda warning because we've seen it on television and the films for so long. Well, what happens when you are pulled over by a police officer and he or she wants to search your car? Do you have to let the search proceed? And should you be told of your rights at that time? Some people have suggested that that sort of thing ought to happen. So I think that attitudes do change, and one thing I would point to in particular, unrelated in a way, but similar philosophically, the recent acts of Congress under the Bush administration, the Patriot Act and the Homeland Security Act, specifically the Total Information Awareness effort. I sense growing resentment and a growing distaste for that sort of action, and I think it'll be interesting to see how pervasive that resistance becomes and how loud it becomes. And I think that that civil asset forfeiture is similar in this. It's going to fall into the same basket in public opinion. I think it's going to fall into the same basic basket. It won't fall into the same legal basket for the lawyers necessarily, but it's going to fall into the same public opinion basket. So I think it will be interesting to see, especially again when there doesn't seem to be a real direct connection between the asset that is seized and the crime that has been committed, the value. All right, there's often no real connection there. The fact that it can be a third party. If I was unfortunate enough to buy my secondhand car from a drug dealer innocently, and my car can be seized. So when third parties get involved, and these sorts of abuses were, again, going back to colonial times, precisely what they were trying to avoid. And some have connected the move away from forfeiture in those times to our Eighth Amendment prohibition on excessive fines. Some make that connection there. So I think that we have an interesting public opinion story that we'll have to watch.
Maybe I can follow up a little bit on what Jessica is saying again, because I think there are some real parallels to be drawn from what we're seeing with regard to our war on terrorism going on right now, where we really have only semi-controlled hysteria. The force of the day is, oh, we're all concerned about this, so let's again deprive our people of their civil liberties. And we are doing that with regard to this war on terrorism and the Homeland Security and the rest, and we have been doing that with regard to our war on drugs. So getting back to the issue at hand, I believe that this is really a question of leadership. Who are we? What do we stand for as Americans, as Californians, as people in the government of Palm Springs? Is this the type of thing that we want to get involved with? Because I can tell you something really fundamental, which I know you already realize. Incentives matter. Incentives matter. And if you have cash in front of a police officer or a high school kid in the inner city or anywhere else, the temptations to involve yourself in corruption, either individually or institutionally, are strong. We have seen that with regard to our children around the nation and around the world, where we now have little young Mexican kids getting $500 or so to tape a bunch of cocaine onto their legs and walk it across the border because of the money. The drugs are dangerous, there's no question about it, but the money is more dangerous than the drugs. And we need some leadership. I said that this Inca program, from my estimation, was not illegal, and I believe that, but we need leadership to have people stand up and say, we don't want to be tainted with that. We don't want to put the incentives on our police forces to have to bring in money to the city because of that. If they do, fine. That's appropriate. But don't be involved with an institution that encourages that sort of conduct. And let me say one more thing, and then I'd really like the chief to respond to that too if he feels so inclined.
I'm ready.
I know you're ready. I have been told in Orange County, again, I know nothing about Riverside County except that I'm here. I think I'm here. And I'll go back home tonight. But I do know several cities in Orange County have instructed, their chiefs of police have instructed their troops. If you are following somebody, and that bad guy, he's a drug dealer, and he's carrying one suitcase that you know full well has a bunch of drugs in it, and another suitcase that you know full well has a bunch of cash. And then he comes up to a Confederate and gives one suitcase to the Confederate, and they part company. The regular instructions are follow the cash. That means let the drugs go. Now, the chief already said that's not your decision here, and I think that's to be commended. But at least 2 cities in Orange County, at least as of a couple of years ago, the standard operations instructions were follow the cash. Why? Because if you keep the money, you are in effect getting a liability. You've got to watch over this stuff, and eventually you've got to get some super-duper incinerator in order to get rid of it. You are getting a liability on your hands. But if you seize the money, you have an asset. Now, I question whether that's really what we want our police to do, but again, I come back to the fact that incentives matter, and institutional problems result from the seizure of the booty, seizure of this money. They will do things that you're not going to want them to do because of those incentives. It's a trap. Be careful.
I have a lot of confidence in the courts, and I have a lot of confidence to see the corrections that the courts will make. If there are abuses, I know that eventually the courts will catch up and they will make a harsh correction. The courts have said the procedure on asset seizures are legal. You follow the legal principles. If you do these kinds of things that you're talking about, what happens is you start to see the law change. And we have seen that the law is evolving. As soon as we start trying to take advantage of any law, any of the laws that are out there, we start to take advantage of them. Law enforcement starts to push the envelope. Miranda is a very good example of how law enforcement would try different tactics and confessions and how to obtain a confession. And what the courts would do is they'd say, you're going too far here, and they'd slap us back. You're okay in this area, they'd let us go this direction. So I have, from my experience and from law enforcement community, I have a lot of confidence in that the courts are going to safeguard your rights, and they are going to give us the corrections. Believe it or not, I'm all for rights. I'm all for protection of rights. That's what I'm all about, is protecting rights. And I fall just to the same side of the law if I violate the rights. The main thing, one of the examples is you still are dealing with drug dealers, and you're still putting a drug dealer in jail. You're still after drug dealers, and what if this is a tool to somehow handicap people when they try to sell drugs? I support that. Anything I can do to handicap drug dealers, I'm all for. And I have a tremendous confidence in the courts and that they will give us our corrections. They will go down the line. The things that are cited, they may be happening sooner or later, just as we push the envelope on Miranda, we push the envelope on search and seizure, on how to get inside a house, on the consent issues. We do all of law enforcement, we always try things to see if it's legal. And the courts look at it and they say, no, you lose your evidence on this, you didn't get consent, you used coercion. Although we would look and say, I don't think I did, the courts would say, no, you did, this is not proper, and then you get a case law that comes down. Most of the time, case law is bad police work. When you see these case decisions, it's bad police work. And what happens, unfortunately, for law enforcement is you get